Good afternoon or good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar on catalogs versus sessions. So this is all about really, in very simple terms, explaining the difference between the two and when it makes more sense to use one more than the other. So that's the goal. If this is your first webinar and you don't know who you're listening to, my name's David. I'm part of the software sales team based out of Copenhagen in Denmark. And as usual, we have 60 minutes today with Q&A throughout. And you are very welcome and encouraged to ask questions. At the bottom of your GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see the last panel is called questions. Put a question in there that will come straight through to me. If you're on your Android device or iOS device, then you'll see a question mark icon in the app itself. Tap that and you can answer a question in the same way. Try to keep your questions on topic, more really for anyone else who is listening, so that we don't go too far off today's subject. So that's the plan. Okay, so let us begin. Now, before we zip over to Capture One, we'll answer a couple of questions. Why both? No other application of Capture One's type, and if we pick some obvious ones like Lightroom, Aperture, for example, they have one file system, so a library or a catalog. Capture One has two. Why do we have to be awkward and be difficult? I'll come to that answer in a second, but it's really about choice. Catalogs or libraries are very good at doing one thing. Sessions are also very good at doing some other things. So it's really all about choice. You don't have to use one or the other. We don't force you into using any particular one. You can use both, or you can make your choice. It's entirely up to you. But don't feel bad if you neglect to use one or the other. That's fine. When Capture One started, back in whenever that was, there was only a session workflow. Catalogs came later in 2012 with Capture One 7. So sessions have always been the mainstay of Capture One file management for reasons which will become obvious in a second. So if we want to describe, or in very basic terms, and I will keep it simple today, what is a session good for? Then my description would be for a singular task or a long-term project. So a singular task could be a headshot. It could be a interior shoot, for example. It could be you going out on location somewhere and doing one job for a client. So a singular task, or a long-term project where you want to keep all images from that project in one place. So for example, you might be doing a personal project, some kind of study, whether that's a landscape project, urban decay, social housing, you name it, anything long-term that you want to access in one place. It is also particularly good for tether capture. If you are a tethered shooter and you're shooting into a catalog, stop and shoot into a session. There is no way that shooting into a catalog is going to give you any other advantage. Towards the end, I'll point you towards some other resources around the subject of catalogs and sessions, and one of those is a webinar purely about tethered capture, where we go into a lot more detail on working in a session, especially when you're shooting tethered, with automatic naming, organizing your file and folder structure, clever stuff for export, and so on. So session, singular task or long-term project. Probably going back to what Keith was asking, a catalog. So what is a catalog good for? A catalog is good for a broad overview of all your work. So you and I are photographers, for example. We have an image library of 100,000 images, and we would like some way to be able to view all of those images at once. But most importantly, and the whole point of a catalog, is to have powerful ways to search, filter, discover, and organize, and so on. So really that's the main difference between the two. So with that in mind, what I'll do now is that I'll explain how a session works in a bit more detail than a catalog. Generally, most of you probably have more of an idea how a catalog works because it's more common, and less of an idea how a session works because it's unique to Capture One. So what I'll do is I'll go through, let's just come out of this a second and go to Capture One, and we should have our mouse locator. What I'll do is I will go through a session in the most sort of basic sense as such, and then we'll up the game a bit and do a few more things which will help more complex workflows, if you like. And yes, for those of you asking about, can I combine the two? Can I import a session into a catalog? Yes, we shall go through that as well. Because my personal choice, if you're interested, is that I use both. I begin my journey of working on images in the session and finish on a catalog. So hold that thought. Right, let's have a look at a session. This is a session here, but we're going to close that and we're going to start from scratch. So I'm going to say File, New Session, and everything I do from this point forward with this basic session is on default. So I'm not doing anything clever, not changing any options. This is exactly how the experience will be for you if you try the same yourself. So let's call this a long-term landscapes. So I'm doing a long-term landscape project in my local area, for example, and let's say OK. Now everything else in that menu I left as default. The only thing that you might want to change, let's just go to new session, is the location. So where does it store the location? By default it's in the pictures folder. Everything else I've just left as default. So what does Capture One create when we make a session? So here it is, my session folder, long-term landscapes, and by default it will create these 4 folders: capture, output, selects, and trash. And hopefully you can see that it's a very visible open file and folder structure. Everything is encapsulated in one master folder, and then the subfolders reside in that. And we have this last file here called the co-session DB, which tracks and remembers certain things like albums, smart albums, favorites, which we'll come to in a second. So this is the brains behind it, kind of like a catalog database, but purely just for this session. Now, if you follow the defaults, then everything will stay within this session, which then makes it very easy to move this session from this computer to an external hard drive, to another computer, to a server, and continue working on it. So we had the questions this morning. I do some work on my laptop on location. When I get back to my office or studio, I then want to move that session to my desktop computer. And that's no more complex than picking it up and moving it across your network. Everything comes with it. All the adjustments, all the organization that you might have done is move with that session. So Keith, who was asking earlier, who said, why do people recommend sessions be used as a day-to-day tool and catalogs long-term storage? Part of it is portability, and part of it is you'll see how the workflow develops. So our session is empty right now. If we go to the library tool tab, that's the first one. It's pretty simple to see the folders named here relate to the folders that we have in our session. So they are shortcuts to access those various different folders, which nothing will see here because they are currently empty. So let's get some images into our session. So I'm going to just move, grab another Finder window and just go to this folder here. So I've got some images to import. Now you can do this little trick with the session. Let's just grab a bunch of them. You can avoid an import process completely when working with the session. So if you imagine you've come back from a shoot and you've got all these images on your memory card, SD card, CF card, if you simply just drag them into the capture folder, like so. Of course, they're going to copy across from my external drive, but Capture One will actually just start picking them up like so. So if you want to avoid any kind of import dialog, you just want to simply drag and drop, then there's nothing to stop you doing that. Capture One will recognize them. It will start making previews for them, as you can see now. With a catalog, as you'll see, you must go through some kind of import process. A catalog is not a browser. It isn't monitoring folders at all time and so on. Whereas in our session, Capture One is constantly monitoring what's going on in capture, output, selects, and trash. Okay, let's just close that down. So now we have some images in the session. How simple was that? Very easy. And then of course you can go through in Capture One and begin to work on them, do what you need to do, and so on and so forth. Now the next part again, we're keeping it simple, and we go to a more complex or involved workflow in a second. Let's just go back to Finder. Oh, my fast app switch has disappeared off my Mac. That's fun. Hopefully that won't affect us. Let's go back to Finder and then think about what's the next natural thing that you do in your workflow. So we've got some captures. Unless you're an amazing photographer, it's highly likely that you won't have, out of 39 shots, 39 usable ones, or you might at least want to drill down and make some selections, hence the folder called selects. So we can do a couple of things. Let's say, looking at these images, which ones do I want to keep from my long-term landscape project into a selects folder? So let's just grab, and we can drag and drop like so. I'm just going to randomly pick a few. Let's grab my selfie, why not? And so on. So you can see what's happening here. They are being physically moved from capture folder to selects folder like so. It is a physical move. So now if I go to my selects folder, we can now see those images that I brought in there. I can go in, I can play around in Capture One, of course, and make some adjustments as you would expect. So of course our images still belong in the capture folder. If you think there's anything dreadful that needs to be trashed, we can of course take it and we can either drag and drop it into the trash folder, or we can use a shortcut, which is Command Backspace or Control Backspace if you're on PC, and then that will go to the trash folder. But it's not permanently deleted, it's still sitting in our trash folder like so. Also, for working with selects, if we go back to our capture folder, if you don't like drag and drop and you want to put your mouse and pen down and just use cursor keys, then you'll find in the file menu that we have where is it? Here we go. I only know the shortcut. Move all selected variants to selects folder, Command J, Control J if you're on PC. So now I can go through and think, okay, let's keep that one, Command J. Let's keep this one, Command J. Let's keep this one, Command J, and so on. So if you're a shortcut person, you might prefer that workflow. Yes, John, when we drag and drop, are we moving the originals? We are moving them from here to there. So you see they physically moved in the Finder. Now, if I did it here, if I moved it from capture to, so what number is that? Number 787, which is this one here. So if I do this like so and go back to capture one, you see it disappeared straight away, and now it's in selects. So even if you do stuff in the Finder, capture one will keep up as well. So that's really good to know about a session 2. So now the next obvious part of our workflow, once we've selected, is that, and we've done our adjustments in capture one, let's pretend we've adjusted all of these and they're finalized. We would now go to our output tool tab and then process them out using process recipes, because that's the fastest and most efficient way to do it. Again, everything here is left on default, so I haven't changed anything. So if I select all of these, let's not select all of them, let's just select the top 4, and we choose a process recipe. Let's have full-size JPEGs. Our recipe is described here. The output location, if we don't change it, goes to the output folder of the session. If we want to double check that, we can click that arrow and you can see it's going to the output folder, indicated nicely here. Output naming, I'm just going to put this back to basics. By default, it will be the same name as the image. We talk about changing that a bit later. And everything else is on default. So now with my top 4 selected and I say process down here, and we go back to the Finder, you can see that they're all going to pop into the output folder quite nicely. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is your simple basic session workflow. Keep everything like so. Now, of course, as this is a long-term project, I could drop more images into the capture folder, I could move more to selects, and so on and so forth. But if it is long-term, then what we do next is we'll look at some other techniques which will organize that better for the long-term itself. But to finish off the basic side of things, this session, it's on my laptop, it's in the pictures folder. Let's say we want to do some editing on my desktop, or I want to move it to a hard drive. So let's do that. Let's drag and drop it to my little external SSD. That's going to copy across. Let's actually close this session down. Let's go to the go away window. Let's go to the SSD. We'll find it, long-term landscapes, there it is. And now all you have to do to open the session up, double click, and then it's going to open straight up from that hard drive. And you see, if we go to my capture folder, selects, output, trash folder, like so. And yes, we can see our JPEG outputs as well. So you see it's a really nice portable medium that's easy to move around from laptop to desktop and back again to hard drive and back again and so on. And then all I did was follow everything as defaults. Now, if you find that when you process, for example, that you're processing it, but it's going to some old session that you opened a few days ago or whatever, very nice tip, go to output location and just say reset tool. And then that will reset to the exact correct place. Okay, before we look at maybe doing some next level organization of this, let's just have a look at the questions. Can you create a session with a selection of images from within a large existing catalog? You could. I don't know why you want to do that. I think if you've already got images in a catalog and you want to create a selection of images, then you would use a collection in a catalog to do so. When you output the images, do the images in the capture one from selects folder move to the output folder? No, you're not moving anything because we're repurposing, because we've made JPEG. So we had Sony RAW files here, and then when we outputted, we created JPEGs. The RAW file is sacred. It's never touched. It's never altered. We don't edit the RAW file at all in any way, or the data in the RAW file. When we go to output, that's where it goes, like so. And Alexander was asking, could you work directly with a session on a NAS? It depends. It very much depends on read and access rights, the speed of the NAS, and so on. Network attached storage, NAS. In more recent years, it's got better, but depending how old the NAS is, depends on your access speed, it might not be that great. Certainly you could work off external hard drives, no problem. Some people do have success with working off NASes, some people don't. So it's very much an individual case as such. Why can't I see processed JPEGs that end up in a subfolder of output? We will come to that in a second. Okay. And John says, what's this little capture one folder down here? Well, you'll see in the capture folder, it's there. In the output folder, it's there. In the selects folder, it's there. This actually contains all the adjustments for the images in this folder. So if you actually took this selects folder and sent it to somebody who had capture one and they imported it, then it would import in with all your adjustments. So it's basically a sidecar folder with adjustments from all the images, and it also contains a preview. Okie dokie. All right, so that's, if you like, a kind of basic session. And the reason why I use a session is kind of twofold. So first of all, when I import all my images from my camera memory card, I know that out of 1,000 images that I've shot, I'm going to end up deleting about half of them because they're just no good. So I don't want to import 1,000 images into a catalog, then just to have to delete half of them. It also means using a session. I can throw it on my little external hard drive. I can work on it on my laptop. I can work on it on my desktop and so on. I can move around with it. I'm not restricted by having to do really anything complicated, but just carry a tiny hard drive with me. When I've got to the point of finishing my session and I've got a selects folder which has all the good stuff in it, I then move those images across to a catalog. And there's a couple of different ways you can do that, which we'll talk about when we look at catalogs. How do you sync the SSD files with the Mac HD? Well, I think I don't know how I can make this any clearer, but this is totally portable. So look, if let's say I'm on my laptop and I want to go to a desktop, I copy it to the SSD like so. So that will copy across. Here it is. I can then carry this to my desktop, open it from the SSD and work on that for example. There's no reason why I can't work on it off the SSD. Go back to my laptop, connect the SSD to the laptop, continue working on it. I could copy it to the pictures folder if I wanted to, continue on working it, copy it back to the SSD drive. It is entirely portable as such. So I don't know how I can make that any clearer. Yes, I will talk about the favorites folder. So now we're going to talk about some better ways to organize. So let's close this down, which would be better for long-term projects as such. So let's say new session again. We're going to put it in the pictures folders. We're going to call this long-term clever session, just to be descriptive, and say OK. We will end up with exactly the same thing as we had before, our capture, output, and selects and trash folder, like so. Now, instead of dragging and dropping into the capture folder, I'm going to use the import dialog because that gives us a few more options to help us organize in an automated and intelligent way. So if I grab the import icon in the top left, import images, and let's choose a source. So let's choose our folder. Now, most likely this is going to be from a camera memory card, but I'm just going to grab the same folder of images again that we had before, like so. And now let's just reset this so you know what it looks like. We're going to say, where do we want to import to? By default, it says session folder, which will just drop them. Sorry, let's click that arrow, which will just drop them directly in the session here, which I don't like. I want them in the captures folder. Okay, so first of all, I need to change this to capture. And now I know, as this is a long-term project, I've been away for a week or whatever, these were shot over a variety of different ways. Sorry, a variety of different days. And I'd like to organize them by day, but I can't remember when I shot these various images, and it's too cumbersome to import them and look at the metadata and then rearrange them. So let's ask Capture One to do that for us. So you'll see here under destination, capture folder, we have a field called subfolder. Now I can manually type in here and get Capture One to make me a subfolder if I wish. Or if we click on the button to the right, we can use a token which pop up all over the place in Capture One. And what a token does is extract some kind of metadata from the image, individual image, and do something useful with it, like make a folder in this case, make a watermark on the image, for example, all kinds of other things, or use it as part of naming convention. That's another example. I know there is a token in the date section, which is called image date. So I'm going to drag and drop that up here. And you'll see there's a little arrow to the right, and this allows me to change the date format. So let's have year, month, day, like so. And we get a sample here, so that's going to be 17 for 2017, June, and the 8th, like so. So let's say OK. Excuse me. Now naming, image naming, I'm just going to leave as image name. We could rename it using a token again, if we wanted to. We could add some basic metadata, copyright and description, or we can add a Capture One styles or preset. I've just got here added my metadata preset, which adds some basic metadata and copyright information and so on. So now, using the power of the token, Capture One will look at when each of these images was shot and place them in a folder named like our token suggests, year, month, day. And we will also add some metadata. So yes, we've had to do a bit more than just drag and drop, but Capture One is going to organize for us and add a bit of metadata. So let's say import all, like so. An album has been created because these images were taken on different days, but to be helpful, Capture One's created an album where we can basically look at this whole import in one hit, but you'll see that in a minute. So before we do that, let's look at here and go to the capture folder, and now we can see they're automatically divided into the days that they were shot. So this is great for a long-term project. So let's say I'm doing a project that's spanning 6 months or something like that. The next time when I go back to this session, let's just say import again, and I just leave this exactly as it is, then Capture One is going to keep building those date folders for me, for example. If you want to, you could combine those tokens. We're not restricted to one token, or we can always prefix it with a bit of text. If you put a / in between them, / for PC, then it will go down into another level in the folder tree. So if I'd done this, then what we would have ended up in the capture folder would have been, let's just get Command Finder, where are we? This is the one I want to press, sorry. What we would have ended up with, if we'd set it up like this, is capture, then another folder called USA, and then it would have contained my date folders. So if you're doing a long-term project in different locations, or you want some kind of manual folder, you can just set it up like this. Okay, let's just delete that and say cancel. And now, Harold, I think it was, we can talk about session favorites after we answer a question. You're saying the session folder can be moved from station to station, but wouldn't each station need to have Capture One installed? Yes, absolutely, because you're opening up the images in Capture One, so completely. Can a token adjust for time zones? No, it can't, but that's a good idea. Yeah, that could be interesting. Craig says, is there a way to quickly access and edit my metadata presets in styles, for example, change the years? No, you can't edit the preset, but what I would do, let's just have a look. See, you'll be able to see my preset here, I think, if I set it up correctly. So that's added my metadata. But if you wanted to edit something, then the simplest way to do it is edit it and then just save it again like so. See, in this case, I've missed out my copyright notice. Very slack. So let's do copyright David Grover 2017, like so. So now what I would do, Craig, I would say save user preset. We want to see what that's part of, and we can say save. And we could actually overwrite it. You know what? So if I click that and say save, so do you want to replace it? Yes, I do. But of course, that won't affect the current images. That's only going to affect new imports we do. But we could overwrite like that. So I need to update these with my copyright. So I could select all, click on this, and just copy everything over. So now I should have my copyright information on everything. So we're going to use that later for a token. Is it possible to sync different cameras' capture time if two cameras have a different capture time date? No, it's not possible because we can't edit the raw data. So you need to use a different app like EXIF tool to do that, for example. Alrighty, so now a really important thing. So we can see we've got these folders here that sit in the capture folder. I can't remember who was asking, but whoever it was, you're right. If I go to capture folder, I can't see the subfolders, because the capture folder looks at the currently nominated capture folder, which doesn't necessarily have to be this. So if we right click and say show in library, then Capture One will show you exactly where it is. But you see capture is the currently nominated capture folder. So for example, if I right click here and said set this as the capture folder, for example, you'll see now when I'm on capture, it shows me the contents of this one, for example. So it's just a shortcut to the currently nominated capture folder, which you can change by right clicking and saying set as capture folder. But what I'm going to do to avoid having to dig my way through this tree all the time is take my folders here and then drag them to session favorites. Oh, helps if I drag it to the right place, drag them to session favorites, and now you see they are all added to session favorites and I can browse them nice and quickly. Really important bit of information coming up now, so prick your ears up. Session albums, for example, smart albums that we can make here that, for example, search based on star rating, like 5 stars, for example. Let's just make an image 5 stars, press 5 on my keyboard. So now that pops up here. So smart albums that search on things like star rating or color tag, they will not work if you don't have your folders in session favorites. So smart albums search in capture, selects, output and trash, and any other folder which is dragged as a session favorite. And you say, well, that's a bit stupid. Shouldn't it automatically just go through the whole session? But because technically we could browse my entire system just by flicking through a session, then what we do is say add them to session favorites, and Capture One will know that you want that to be part of your search criteria. And again, as Harold was asking, I think, I think it was Harold. Apologies if I'm not right. Yes, it was. It just gives me a fast way just to browse through various images like so. So now we've been a bit smarter with our various different folders here, but now we probably don't want to use the selects folder because we don't really want to drag stuff out of its date folder and put it into selects, because then we're just going to end up with a big list of images. So this is where it makes more sense to use star ratings or color tags, for example. So if I go to, let's say we go to the 23rd, and then we look at these images and think, well, out of these, which ones are keepers? I'll just use number 7 on my keyboard to tag the images as green, like so. Then I could go to my next collection over here, my next favorites, and then go through and think, well, out of these, which ones do I want to keep? I'll just do a few. Got to have the selfie and so on. So we just tag a few green and so on. So this way, instead of moving images, we're using metadata tags like a color tag to choose images. So I use the keyboard shortcut, just so you know, color tag number 7 is green. But if you want to, you can do it the slow way of finding the image, clicking here and changing the color tag. But it's way faster to do it with keyboard shortcuts, for example. So now we're doing selects with color tagging, but it might be a nice way to view those all in one go, which of course makes sense to do a session album. So let's make a smart album. Let's call this green images, and we can can't type today, green images, and we can use a preset up here which will basically set the criteria. Color tag is green, and we say OK. Pops up under session albums. Now if I click here, it'd show me all my green images like so. So now in this workflow we totally avoid using the selects folder, so we don't need it. So we do everything with color tags and using smart albums, for example. Or if you wanted to, if you don't like the idea of smart albums, but you want some folder called selects, then you can make just a normal album and drag and drop stuff there, but nothing gets moved. So that's virtual organization, if you like. The clever thing about using a color tag and a smart album is that it's dynamic. So if after I looking at these, I think, you know what, that really is a rubbish image, I'm just going to clear that. So press number 6, and now it's gone. So it's easier to change your mind with those, for example. So if you think, what was I thinking of putting this image in? Let's clear that color tag. So now, if we think about the next stage of the workflow, we go to our process recipe tab and we want to process. Now this is going to be inspiration for next week, because just looking at the time, we have to talk about catalogs at some point. So I'm going to do a clever sort of couple of tricks here. And then this will be inspiration for next week, where next week's subject is going to go into this in much more detail. So let's run, instead of one process recipe, let's run 2 at the same time. So we're going to have a, let's do a full-size TIFF. Let's do a full-size JPEG, it'll be quicker. And let's have a quick proof JPEG, which basically just uses the preview that Capture One creates when we look at images in Capture One. I'll explain more on that in catalogs. And the keen-eyed amongst you, if we just open up an image, you see it's popped down a watermark here, but the watermark is dynamic, as you can see. So we've got a file name and my copyright. How did I do that? So if we look at this process recipe and go to watermark, we want a text watermark, and we're using a couple of tokens. Once again, tokens pop up. So we're using the image name, which is the image name here, and we're using the copyright notice in the metadata. So this is dynamic. So if we actually go to this image and we just edit this, for example, let's just change it in this one. Let's just delete my surname. Then you see it changes straight away, but the other images you see like so. So the nice thing about the watermark is that it makes it totally dynamic. We can edit how the watermark looks by changing the font size, the opacity, as you can see, its scaling, where it sits, like so. So I've just tucked that in the bottom left-hand corner. So let's turn that process recipe on. And now if I process all of these out, remember we're looking at my green images only. If I process all of these out, we're going to end up with, in the output folder, how many images have we got? 16 images, because we're running 2 process recipes, but they're going to have the same file name. Capture One will put 1 on the end of it, but that's not really very helpful. We don't know which is which. So now, again with a token in our output location, I know there's a token called recipe name. So Capture One will make a folder called recipe name in the output folder. And to avoid having file names with the same name, I'm going to ask Capture One to rename them with the image name and, again, the recipe name, so I know which is which. And I'm going to put a little underscore in between it, so it will help define it. So 2 process recipes running. Note that all these images, because we were clever and we used a green tagged images smart album, all these images belong in different folders. So I haven't had to switch through folders, select an image, process, go to another folder, select an image and process. I'm seeing all the green images from my entire session. So it's going to save me lots of work. And now if we go to the output folder and we say process, you'll see Capture One's made full-size JPEG, refers to the recipe name here. Now it's made JPEG sRGB preview size, and images are popping in as we speak, like so, except I only have 1 selected. Okay, let's delete that and remember to select all before we process. Okay, check I'm in the right session, so let's select all and now say process. That's better. So full-size JPEG, like so, JPEG sRGB, and then the rest of our images, if we just wait a second, are popping in like so. If you look at the name of the image, it's got full-size JPEG underneath. If we go to this one, it says, bit of a long name, but JPEG sRGB quick proof preview size. So we've got the file name and we also know how it was processed. If we look in the output folder, then we won't see anything, remember, because we're only looking at the output folder. But if we wanted to, there's nothing to stop us adding those as favorites as well. So now if I look at that, we can see our JPEGs and we can see our quick proofs, like so. Alrighty, let's just have a look at your questions. If you have a keyword library or any other presets set up in your main session, are those keywords available? Yes. So if you've made a keyword library, it will just show up here. So there's my keyword library, like so. So yes, you could. What's the difference between a session favorite and the selects folder? Shouldn't session favorites just be favorites? Not sure I understand your question there. Remember, selects is a physical folder. This is a shortcut to the physical selects folder. Session favorites is folders that you've made additionally in the session, like our date folders, and you want them to be recognized as part of your search criteria. So, Michaela says, could you just click on the filters, color tag or ratings filters in the filters section instead of viewing them in an album? Yes, you could. So if you don't want to make a smart album, you could go to all images and you could say show me all the greens. So that's another way of doing it. Yes, you could. Can you change the key shortcut of the color tag? Yep, just go to edit keyboard shortcuts, go to adjustments and find color tag. There we go. So you can just click on it and change it to whatever you want. Can you change the position of the watermark? Yes, Ed, hopefully you saw that when I did it. In the Smart album, could you select all images and physically move the files from capture to select? I guess no reason why you couldn't. So if we did that, shall we try it? And then say move to selects, boom, there we go. Yes, you can. Can you use tokens in metadata presets? No, but that's a good idea though. So that could work nicely, but no, you can't, Kenneth. Alrighty, so to kind of draw a session to a close, again, I hope you can see that, it's good for that singular project. If you are a tethered capture shooter, then it makes perfect sense to shoot into a session because you've got the folders already made for you. You can shoot into the capture folder, you can move selects to the selects folder, process to the output folder with some handy automatic folders created like so. Even if you're shooting tethered, you can create additional shot folders like shot 1, shot 2, shot 3, shot 4, shot 5. And also with the use of tokens, get those shot folders to be automatically replicated in the output folder. To do all of that in a catalog will mean you'd have to do loads of manual creation of folders, and it's way, way slower. And the other thing, of course, that we haven't discussed is if you want to send an entire session to someone, there's nothing to stop you right-clicking, saying compress, like so, and then you end up with, I'll cancel it, so, oh no, it's pretty quick. You could end up with a .zip file like that, which you can easily just send off to someone as well. They'll open it up and it will have all the session structure, adjustment, star rating, color tags, everything. So yes. Okay, so let's go on to a catalog. I'm just going to stop that, and yes, I will show you how you could get the session into a catalog. So let's make a new catalog. Whoops, opened up the wrong session. Hang on, let's close you down. Let's say new catalog. Call this David's catalog. Now, when we make a new catalog, the only thing that we're making, if we look at it, is this, a database. We have not, or Capture One has not created any folders, subfolders. All it is a database that is going to track the location of your images depending on where you import them to. So the catalog is not a browser. I don't have a library over here anywhere. I can't browse my folders or anything like that. A catalog is only successful if you import images into it. And again, we do that with the import dialog. Now, when you're working, if you are working in a catalog, excuse me, the only two things you really need to get right is import from up the top and import to. Everything else underneath is kind of bonus stuff. So import from and import to. Now, import from is probably pretty easy to guess. That's where am I getting images from? That's going to be a few different places. It could be a memory card from a camera. It could already exist on your system somewhere, whether that's internally or external drives, and so on. So let's just pull up the same images, these ones, as we did before. And the next part, this is important. Where are those images going? So current location, stay there, cursor. That means they are going to stay at their current location, funnily enough. But Capture One will know how to access them. It will know their location. The next one, inside catalog, is going to be possibly interesting to those of you who have used Aperture in the past, because what inside catalog means is that images will get copied directly inside the catalog file itself. Technically, we refer to those as managed images because Capture One is managing the location of those images for you. So they disappear inside here. The advantage of that, it gives you a very nice portable catalog, much like a session. The disadvantage of that is that you are limited to how much space you have left on the hard drive where the catalog is. Now, in this day and age, 400 gigabytes can get gobbled up pretty quickly. But it's kind of a good case using managed catalogs for like smaller projects. I personally would use a session for reasons we've just talked about, because all those folders are set up for me, the capture and the output and so on. But if you wanted to do a long-term project in a managed catalog, that could be a way to do it. The third option is choose folder. So where are we going to copy the images to? But in this case, all I'm going to do is say leave them at current location. Now, as I said, everything else underneath is all bonus stuff. But if we want to, we can add, let's add my metadata style again. We'll be able to test this, Craig, if it has updated correctly. We can auto adjust. Let's do that too. Why not? And so on. So let's say import all. In they come. Now we've still got that process recipe selected, so that's why we can see our watermark. So let's come away from that. So images are popping in, they're being automatically adjusted. If we're set it up correctly, we should see the metadata has come in. Yes, it has. Let's scroll down and you can see the edit we made has come in as well. That's good. And what Capture One's doing right now is creating previews as well. And really important, prick up your ears if you're on a larger high resolution monitor like 4K or 5K, because by default Capture One will make previews which are 2560 pixels wide, which generally fits most people's monitors. Oh, excuse me, that took me by surprise. 2560 pixels across generally fits most people's monitors. Now, if you've gone out and bought yourself a nice spanking 4K monitor or a 5K iMac, you will need to increase your preview size. The reason for that is when we're browsing in Capture One, we're actually looking at the previews. So that allows us to browse back and forth nice and quickly, for example. It's only when we zoom in to 100% that then we need to look at the raw data. But otherwise, we're looking at the preview file. Now, if your monitor is 5000 pixels across, then you can imagine a 2560 pixel across preview is not big enough. So Capture One will then always have to access the raw data. So it will make your system run much slower. Well, that fooled the auto white balance, didn't it? Just goes to show. I mean, auto's generally pretty good, but in some cases it does get tricked. So if you are on a bigger machine, you do need to go to preferences and up that. If I change it now, it won't have any effect on existing images unless I ask Capture One to regenerate the preview, which I can do in a batch if I wish. So now that we've got images in a catalog, this area is going to look slightly different. It's split into 3 different sections. So we've got catalog collections. So this is basically all the images in the catalog, the last 10 imports I made, recent captures if you've shot Tethered, which you shouldn't, you should use a session, and the catalog trash. User collections is where we can make stuff like albums and smart albums like we did with the session, similar concept. And folders will show you exactly where your images reside on your system or any connected drives or servers as such. So if I was to import something else, let's just do another quick import. Let's choose a different folder. Let's grab this folder of 2 images, import those. What you'll see is that we have recent imports like so. And then we've got the path to where those images are as such. So folders shows you exactly where all the images are on your system or connected drives, servers, basically anything can access. Someone asked this morning, what if I've accidentally imported them inside the catalog, but I don't want them inside the catalog, or I meant to have them inside the catalog and I didn't? Well, you can actually just pick up an image, drag and drop it to catalog, and then that will be moved inside the catalog. Or we can click on the catalog icon, shows me 1 image is inside the catalog, I can drag that back out and that will physically move it. So you can convert images from managed to referenced just by drag and drop between those 2 things. Now, the only other thing you really need to know about catalogs is that if you want to move images around, you need to do that within Capture One. You saw on the session that I could move an image in the Finder from Capture to Selects and Capture One will keep up, but it can't do that in a catalog because it's impossible. Because should we monitor every single folder and hard drive connected for minute changes, in a session we've only got to look at 4 folders and favorites. So that's easy to watch. But I can't watch an entire system of folders. That will be a huge hit on performance. So if I want to move images around from folder to folder, then I do that in Capture One. So for example, if I wanted to move Alex, for example, from here to here, then I do that within Capture One. You should be able to see Alex, she's going to stick out like a sore thumb. And then if I want to move it back, then I drag and drop within Capture One. If I do that outside of Capture One in the Finder system itself, then what we're going to end up with, let's just do it. Tell you what, let's move this one, number 787. So let's just go to here. So let's move 787, just drop it 1 level up. So you see now this will say it's offline. See the little tiny question mark? And up here it says it's offline, and Capture One does not know where it is. So what we need to do is right click and say locate and tell Capture One it is right here, like so. And now it will be back in its top level spot like so. But that's given me a whole load of extra work. Why don't I just drag and drop in Capture One in the first place? Then it gets moved at Finder level. You see it's back. The database is updated. I don't have to do any location. You can drag and drop entire folders too. If you do that outside of Capture One, once again, you can right click and locate entire folders too. But you can avoid that whole time consuming process if you simply stick to the rule that I'm going to move stuff around in Capture One. If in the Finder you do a whole load of stuff, then you can actually right click and synchronize a folder, and that will get rid of images that it can't find and import new images as such. But again, try to avoid doing that. Just do everything in Capture One. Your life will be much simpler before it. And then additionally with catalogs, you've got a whole array of different organizational items that you can use to help organize your catalog. You could, if you wanted to, simply stick to folders down here, or you can be more advanced and use stuff like albums and smart albums, that you saw earlier. There won't be time today to go into detail about that because we'll run out of time soon, but I'm going to point you towards some resources before we finish where it goes into much more detail about user collections. Quick look at questions, then we'll talk about getting a session into a catalog, and that will be it. Okay. Ronald is using a catalog on his main drive with RAWs on an external hard disk. When I back up the external drive, hang on. Yeah, because even if you've backed up images to a different drive, even if it has the same name, it still actually has a slightly different name at system level. So what you'll need to do is, because your Z drive will be showing as missing, so if you right click and say locate and point to your backup drive, then everything should pop over nicely. Andy says, would it be fair to say if you're space constrained, use sessions, then zip them and move them off when no longer required? Yeah, that's also something you could do. Again, there's no right or wrong rules in this. It's entirely up to you. But yeah, you could do that. If you select leave at current location, can you keep working on... I can't understand your question, Alexander. Sorry. Maybe you can rephrase that better. Is there danger of losing images if the catalog file gets corrupted if the images are stored inside the catalog? There's always a danger, of course, but I would hope that your catalog is being backed up at least every hour automatically, and then there should be no reason that you will ever lose any images, to be honest. If you have a good backup system in place, then you should always be able to go back to backup. If I paraphrase your question, Adam, is there a performance hit for more images in a catalog? or does Capture One run faster with sessions than a catalog? It's really hard to say, give you exact performance specs, because it really does depend a lot on the system. So if you have fast internal SSDs, super fast brand new PC or Mac, then the catalog's going to fly. If your computer is 6 years old and you have an external USB drive connected on USB 1, then it's going to run much slower. So in theory, there is no upper limit of how many images that you can have, but it really does depend much on the system. So some people, and also your patience, some people want everything to happen instantly. Others are prepared to wait, between switching folders and that kind of stuff. So it's really hard to give you an exact thing. But the bigger a catalog gets, the bigger a session gets, what you may see is that it takes longer to first open. When I say longer, we're talking seconds, not minutes as such. And switching between collections might take a bit longer and so on. Okay. Alrighty. So now finishing off with combining the two, there's a couple of rules that you have to just consider. The way I work is that, so if you imagine I'm in this session and I've adjusted these images and so on. Let's close the catalog so we don't confuse ourselves. Just to clarify, I'm talking about using both and a good system for that. So let's go back to my session, close too many windows. So let's think about this session. Okay, I've finished. I've imported all the images I'm going to do in this particular session. I've done all my adjustments. I've done some processing and so on. And I want to get that into my master catalog on my desktop machine. So I have a couple of options. So let's open up my catalog. I can do a couple of things. I can do a very quick and straightforward one, which is import session, like so. I can find my session and click on, hang on, where are we? Pictures, long-term landscapes. Locate the co-session DB and then simply say import. Capture One will import that session, as you can see. It will make me a user collection called a project, and it'll have in there all the session folders and all the session albums, as you can see, like so. So that's the quick and easy way to do it. Bear in mind that we don't move anything. So the catalog is just looking at where the session currently is, wherever that may be, and creating this nice user collection arrangement here, but nothing is moved. You'll actually see it, we can now see it here in the folders area, pictures, long-term landscape, and we can see all the folders like so. So it hasn't moved anything. It's just referencing where it is currently. Now the second rule that you have to understand is that if I open this session, like so, if I open this session and make changes here, it will not be reflected in the catalog. They do not synchronize. The session database and the catalog database do not talk to each other. So that's why I think of it as an archival process. So I've finished my session. I'm now going to archive it into my catalog. So that's one way of doing it, with simply file, import session. That's not the way I do it. What I simply do is, where are we? In my session. All I do is I grab these folders, or I grab the capture folder, I copy it to my big fat external hard drive, which has all my images on there. I rename the capture folder to the name of the project, for example, like long-term session. Then all I do is simply import those images into my catalog. Now, because we have this handy little Capture One folder with all the adjustments, as long as when I import, I have include existing adjustments checked, then all my adjustments carry over. Now, the reason why I don't do the session import is that I'm not a big heavy Photoshop user. I pretty much do everything in Capture One. I don't necessarily keep all the outputs like Instagram uploads and all that kind of stuff. So really all I'm interested in is the raw files. So If that doesn't make sense and you want to kind of go over that again, what I can suggest is I'm just going to copy paste some stuff into the chat window like so. Some other resources. So the first one on that list is actually this blog post, which describes how I do that workflow I've just said very briefly. So there's screen grabs, there's an explanation and so on. So if you want to kind of follow that, you can, or you just use the good old file import session as such. Talking more about catalog organization, there's a webinar which I did with a photographer, Jordan Bush. He's ex-Aperture user, and he really goes to town on his catalog organization. So he's a good guy to actually talk to see really what's possible. There's a short managing a catalog tutorial, like so, which is only 12 minutes, but that talks more about these various different user collections that you can make up here for powerful organization. If you're a tethered shooter, then we also have optimizing, turn myself off. We have optimizing tether capture, which again goes through the session workflow as usual, and how to optimize that, how to have automatic naming and so on, and session templates, and a few other bits we haven't spoken about. And then finally, if you want to read more and more about sessions, we've got a 3-part. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. That's the wrong one. My mistake. We've got this one. Come on, open up. Also on our blog, a 3-part article going from basic stuff to sessions to in-depth. So if you have any questions, concerns, etc. about sessions, if you read all of that, you're going to know as much as sessions about I do. So it should be fine. The recording for this, I can't remember who was asking. Zen was asking, and I think Helen as well, perhaps. I think it was Helen. This will be, the recording will be up tomorrow, so you can check back tomorrow sometime and check out the recording, because I know there's a lot of information to digest as such. And the last question, on session import, do the adjustments only travel across if the box is ticked on import? No, if you're doing the session import session, then we're always going to bring adjustments across. If you're doing it the David way, based on that blog article using the import dialog, then you must have include existing adjustments. But have a read of that article and you will see. Can you put the links on the email? I'm on an iPad right now and can't copy them. Yes, what I'd do is I probably won't put them in the email, because the template is sort of, once it's locked down, it's difficult to change, but if I can, I will. But I'll put them in the description of the YouTube video. So that's one way to get to it. Are these from Arizona? George is asking. They're actually from Arizona, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico. So if you want to see more of these, I had a self-indulgent webinar last week, which was all about processing these out, if you want to check them out. So just to finalize, if we go back to this guy. So remember, session, singular task, long-term project, catalog, broad overview of all your work. That's really the best way to think of it. If you want to come back next week, we are expanding on what we did earlier about the processing using those tokens. So that's all about making a process recipe, all the different options which we didn't have time to look at in a process recipe, and using tokens to help some automation as well. Alrighty, many thanks for your time today. Sorry to overrun a little bit, but again, it's one of those intensive subjects where we could talk for more than an hour, as you say, Alexander. Yes. Okay, thanks again, and hope to see you next week. Take care.